When I told my boss I wanted to start my own company, he laughed so hard, he actually had to wipe tears from his eyes. He leaned back in his expensive office chair, pointed at me like I was a stand-up comedian, and said, "With what dollars? Your lunch money?" The rest of the office tried to stay quiet, but I saw the smirks, the stolen glances. That moment was like a hot slap to the face. The humiliation burned through my skin and settled deep in my chest. I felt small, exposed, like I had spoken a language no one else understood. But as I stood there, holding my resignation letter tightly in my sweaty hands, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something deeper, sharper, a quiet promise to myself that I would never again let someone define my worth or laugh at my dreams. My name is Jenna. I was 29 when this happened, working as a project manager in a huge consulting firm in Chicago. I was the one everyone relied on to clean up the messes, stay late, pick up the pieces when deals went south. My boss Mark loved to take credit for my ideas, toss me scraps of praise in private, and mock me in public. To him, I was useful but disposable, someone he could lean on until I outlived my convenience. At home, I had my mom, Diane, who always told me I was destined for more than cubicles and coffee runs. My dad, Tom, a quiet man who built things with his hands, didn't always understand my world, but respected my determination. My best friend Kayla was my cheerleader and my reality check, the person who pushed me to believe in my vision when I was too scared to say it out loud. I still remember the exact way Mark looked at me that day, like I was a child playing dress-up in an adult's world. But behind his smirk, I saw something else, fear. He knew deep down that I had the talent to build something real, something that didn't rely on his approval. He just hoped I'd never figure that out for myself. As I turned to leave his office, I could feel the weight of every late night, every overlooked achievement, every half-hearted good job that was never meant to empower me. That moment became the beginning of everything. I walked out of that building feeling shaky and terrified, but more alive than I had in years. I didn't have a trust fund or investors lined up. I had a tiny savings account, a cluttered spare bedroom that would become my first office, and an idea that wouldn't let me sleep at night. I had no safety net and no roadmap, but I had my belief, small at first, fragile, but growing stronger with every step I took away from Mark's shadow. I remember getting into the elevator, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. A coworker stepped in with me and looked at my face, then at the envelope in my hand, and asked quietly, "Are you really leaving?" I nodded, and she shook her head, her eyes full of pity. "Good luck," she said, her voice soft but distant, as though she had already decided I would fail. As the doors slid shut, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal. I didn't see a failure. I saw someone finally stepping into her own story. When I got home that night, Kayla was waiting for me with takeout and a bottle of cheap champagne. She didn't ask if I was sure or if I had a backup plan. She just raised her glass and said, "To the day you stopped asking for permission." We clinked glasses, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to succeed. Not just survive, but truly build something of my own. 2 years later, I would walk back into that same building under very different circumstances, but in that first moment, as I stood there with Mark's laughter echoing in my ears, I had no idea just how far that promise to myself would take me. Before that day in Mark's office, my life felt like an endless loop of unfinished coffee cups, late-night emails, and fluorescent office lights that hummed like a dull headache. I woke up every morning at 5:30 a.m., forcing myself out of bed with the same mantra, "Just survive today." I'd ride the crowded train into downtown Chicago, gripping the same handle, standing shoulder to shoulder with other tired souls. Every day felt like I was slowly fading into the gray background of my own life. I had been at the firm for 5 years, working my way up from a junior assistant to a project manager who everyone relied on, but no one really saw. My official job title sounded impressive enough to my parents' friends at dinner parties, but inside, I felt invisible, like an interchangeable cog in a giant, indifferent machine. Mark loved to play the charming leader in front of executives, but behind closed doors, he was venom disguised as wit. He was the kind of boss who thrived on putting people in their place, who viewed vulnerability as weakness and dreams as comedy fodder. He called me the idealist and would say things like, "That's cute, Jenna. Now get me the real numbers," whenever I dared suggest a new idea. I learned to keep my head down, to swallow my thoughts, and just deliver results. But each quiet victory I handed him, he paraded around as his own. And each time he threw a careless insult my way, I felt a small piece of myself fracture. At home, my mom Diane would always sense when something was wrong, even through the phone. "You don't sound like my Jenna today," she'd say, her voice filled with the kind of warmth that could unravel all the tight knots in my chest. She had been a school teacher for 30 years and taught me that my voice mattered, even when the world tried to convince me otherwise. My dad, Tom, was less vocal, a man of few words and strong hands. He'd built everything in our childhood home himself, the deck out back, the kitchen cabinets, the swings in the yard. When he heard about my long hours and stress, he would just nod and say, "As long as you're proud of it, that's what matters." I think he wanted to believe I was, even though he could see in my tired eyes that I wasn't. Then there was Kayla. She had been my best friend since college, the one who forced me to sign up for open mic poetry nights when I was too scared to share my writing, and who showed up at every apartment move with pizza and loud encouragement. Kayla worked in tech and loved to dream big. She was always telling me stories of founders who turned small, fragile ideas into empires, her eyes lighting up as though each story was a personal invitation for us to do the same. She'd always say, "You were never meant to build someone else's ladder, Jenna. You're meant to build your own castle." At work, though, I kept that part of me hidden. I had an idea brewing for years, a creative consultancy focused on authentic brand storytelling, something that could help companies actually connect with people instead of just selling to them. I wanted to help small brands find their voice, to help founders articulate their real stories in a way that felt human. Every night, I'd scribble ideas into a beat-up black notebook, my handwriting crooked and fast from excitement. But every morning, I left that dream on my nightstand and went back to building Mark's empire. I thought I was being practical, responsible, playing it safe. Rent needed to be paid, student loans didn't disappear on their own, and there was always that deep, echoing fear. What if I fail? What if I prove him right? So, I stayed. And with every presentation where he cut me off, every email where he rewrote my ideas as his, every team meeting where my voice disappeared, I felt smaller and smaller. But even under the exhaustion, that small flame inside me refused to go out. My mom's faith in me, my dad's quiet respect, Kayla's wild belief, they lived in that flame. It burned every time I lay awake at night, picturing my name on an office door, seeing a team gathered around me, not because they had to listen, but because they wanted to. It burned every time I watched Mark walk past my desk without even a nod of acknowledgement after I'd saved a project from disaster. It burned strongest the day he laughed in my face, asking what dollars I'd use to build my dream. I didn't know it then, but all those pieces, every tiny flame, were fusing into a fire that was about to consume my entire life as I knew it. And once that spark was lit, there was no way I was going back. After that humiliating meeting, I walked out of Mark's office trying to keep my face neutral, but inside I felt like I was shaking apart. The laughter replayed over and over in my head, echoing in every step I took back to my desk. My fingers trembled as I sat down, staring at my computer screen, but seeing nothing. I felt every eye on me, some pitying, some amused, some indifferent. The office suddenly felt like a glass cage I had willingly locked myself inside. I went home that night and collapsed onto my bed, too exhausted to even cry. Kayla called, and I almost didn't pick up, but I knew she'd keep calling until I answered. The second I heard her voice, the dam broke. I sobbed into the phone. every word tumbling out. How he laughed, how small I felt, how stupid I thought I was for even daring to believe I could be more than an obedient project manager. Kayla let me spill everything, her voice steady and strong on the other end. When I finally ran out of tears, she didn't comfort me in the way most people do. Instead, she challenged me. "Why are you letting him have the final word on your life?" she asked. Her question stunned me into silence. I had always thought of her as bold, but that night, her belief in me felt like a bolt of lightning through my chest. She told me that the only person who needed to believe in my idea was me. That night, I got out my black notebook and opened to a blank page. I wrote at the top, "Bright Ember Creative." It was the name I had once doodled absent-mindedly, thinking it sounded fiery and alive, everything I wanted to be but wasn't yet brave enough to become. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I felt an unfamiliar energy buzzing in my veins. I opened my laptop and started researching business licenses, domain names, branding strategies. My fingers flew across the keys like they had been waiting for this moment all along. By the time the sun rose, I had sketched out the skeleton of my company and emailed Kayla a long, frantic brain dump. She responded in all caps, "Yes, this, now." In the weeks that followed, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to work as usual, quietly absorbing Mark's dismissive comments, his condescending emails, his public snubs. At night, I transformed into the founder of a dream I was building piece by piece in my tiny apartment. My dining table became my command center, covered with scribbled notes, coffee mugs, sticky notes with wild ideas. Kayla would come over after her shifts, bringing takeout and helping me test website mock-ups or review branding copy. She would leave past midnight, and I would keep working, driven by a kind of rage-fueled joy I had never felt before. Meanwhile, Mark's behavior worsened. He started dumping more impossible tasks on me, assigning me work meant for 2 or 3 people, knowing I would stay late to finish it without complaining. It was like he sensed something shifting in me, and his way of controlling it was to bury me under mountains of busy work. I felt my energy drain every day, but at night, I rebuilt myself again. Each small win for Bright Ember, an email inquiry from a potential client, a like on a social media post, a tiny freelance payment, became a glowing ember inside me, proof that I wasn't as small and powerless as he wanted me to believe. The real turning point came when one of my freelance campaigns unexpectedly went viral. It was a simple storytelling video for a small eco-friendly candle brand, something I had poured my heart into on a shoestring budget. Within a week, the brand's online following exploded, and orders surged. The founder messaged me in tears, saying my campaign had saved her struggling business. That moment shifted something permanent inside me. I realized I didn't just want to build a company. I wanted to create work that made people feel seen, work that changed lives in small but powerful ways. Even as my side business started to grow, the fear never fully disappeared. I was terrified every day, terrified of failure, of running out of money, of having to crawl back to Mark and hear his laughter again. But slowly, my belief started to outweigh my fear. Late one night, staring at my spreadsheet of new contracts, I realized I had enough to support myself for at least a year if I left. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking but my mind sharp and clear. I took a deep breath and whispered into the quiet of my apartment, "It's time." For the first time in my life, I didn't ask for permission. I didn't wait for validation. I made the choice for me. The morning I handed in my resignation felt like stepping onto a tightrope suspended over a canyon. My stomach churned from fear, but my hands felt oddly steady as I printed the letter and slid it into an envelope. I got dressed slowly, each movement deliberate, like I was putting on armor instead of just a blazer. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. Not the timid, exhausted Jenna, who had once apologized for taking up space, but a woman standing on the edge of her own life, ready to jump. As I rode the train downtown, the city felt electric, humming with possibility I had never noticed before. Every passing building, Every face on the platform seemed to echo the question I had been asking myself for years. What if you actually did it? When I walked into the office, I felt the usual hush that always followed me. Mark's voice carried across the floor, bragging to a client on the phone, his laugh echoing like nails on a chalkboard. I kept my chin up as I passed my coworkers, some giving me sympathetic looks, some barely noticing at all. I stepped into Mark's glass-walled office and closed the door behind me. He looked up, already annoyed, as if I was an interruption in his personal highlight reel. Before he could speak, I placed the envelope on his desk. His eyebrows shot up in amusement, and he let out a low chuckle. "What's this, Jenna? A love letter?" he sneered, sliding the envelope toward himself with exaggerated slowness. I didn't flinch. I stood there and watched him open it, his smirk fading into a confused scowl as he scanned the words. "You're resigning?" he said, his voice rising an octave. "You can't be serious." I didn't answer. I just nodded once, firm and final. He threw the paper down like it had burned him, leaned back in his chair and started laughing again, that same cold, sharp laugh that had haunted me for years. "Oh, this is rich," he said, shaking his head. "What are you going to do? Start your little dream company with your imaginary money? You'll be back here begging within 6 months. Mark my words." I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, but instead of fear, I felt a surge of clarity. His words no longer felt like chains. They sounded like echoes from a past life I no longer belonged to. I didn't argue. I didn't plead for understanding or validation. I simply turned, opened the door, and walked out of his office for the last time. As I passed my coworkers, I didn't stop to explain. I carried myself out with a quiet confidence that felt like a secret only I knew. The second the elevator doors closed behind me, I let out a shaky breath and felt an invisible weight slip from my shoulders. That night, Kayla came over with champagne, even though we both knew I could barely afford takeout, let alone celebrations. She burst into my apartment with a loud cheer and tackled me in a hug that nearly knocked me off my feet. "You did it!" she shouted, her eyes sparkling with tears and excitement. I laughed and cried into her shoulder, the relief and terror swirling together into something sharp and beautiful. We sat on the floor, drinking cheap champagne straight from the bottle, mapping out what the next weeks would look like. The days that followed were some of the hardest and most exhilarating of my life. I turned my tiny spare bedroom into my first office, a chaotic mix of sticky notes, coffee mugs, and scribbled ideas taped to the walls. I took on every freelance job I could get, said yes to small scrappy projects that barely paid the bills, but built my portfolio and reputation. I worked 16-hour days, fueled by instant noodles and sheer stubbornness. Every morning, I woke up terrified that I had made a catastrophic mistake. Every night, I fell asleep with the quiet thrill of knowing I had survived another day on my own terms. I often thought back to Mark, to his smirk, his cheap jokes, his hollow threats. But instead of haunting me, those memories became fuel. Each success felt like another silent rebuttal to every cruel laugh he had ever thrown my way. I didn't just want to prove him wrong. I wanted to become someone so unstoppable that his opinion ceased to matter entirely. And in those long nights, surrounded by scribbled dreams finally taking shape, I realized I had already done it. I was free. I was building something that was mine. And for the first time, I felt truly alive. 2 years after I handed in that resignation letter, I found myself standing in the lobby of the same towering glass building where I had once spent countless mornings questioning my worth. The marble floors and buzzing elevators hadn't changed, but I had. My heart beat calmly, a quiet, steady drum that reminded me of every late night, every risk, every tiny victory that had led me here. I adjusted my blazer, feeling the soft, structured fabric against my arms, a small symbol of the success I had built stitch by stitch, dollar by dollar. Kayla stood beside me, now officially my business partner and co-founder, grinning so wide it looked like her face might split in two. She leaned close and whispered, ready to watch a man eat his own words? I smiled, not out of spite but from a deep, powerful sense of closure. Bright Ember Creative had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We had moved from my cramped spare bedroom into a bright, airy office filled with plants, art, and laughter. We had clients all over the country, brands hungry for authentic stories and real connections. The team we built felt more like a family than any office I'd ever known. We celebrated each other's wins, pulled each other through late nights, and shared slices of pizza on the floor when deadlines felt impossible. Every time I looked around that space, I knew I had created something real, something alive. When the chance came to buy a floor in my old office building, I didn't hesitate. It was a strategic expansion, but deep down, it was also something more, a quiet, private moment of reclamation. I didn't announce it or brag. I signed the papers, scheduled the move-in date, and let the universe handle the poetry of it all. That morning, I watched as our team trickled into the lobby, their eyes wide with excitement. They had no idea that this was more than just a new office. It was the final step in a story that had started with a single humiliating laugh. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped out onto the floor that used to belong to Mark's division. I could already hear raised voices, Mark's in particular, unmistakable and frantic. Security guards stood near the entrance, quietly professional, waiting for my signal. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment Mark saw me, his face drained of color. He stood there, frozen, clutching a stack of files to his chest like a makeshift shield. His eyes darted from me to Kayla to the security guards, his mouth opening and closing as though he was trying to form words that no longer existed. I walked toward him calmly, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the now silent room. When I finally stopped in front of him, he tried to laugh, that same high-pitched, mocking laugh he had once used to keep me small, but it faltered in his throat, turning into an awkward, strangled sound. "Jenna," he stammered. What is this?" "This," I said quietly, my voice clear and unshakable, "is me taking back what you told me I could never have." I glanced at the security guards and gave a small nod. They stepped forward, politely but firmly instructing him to gather his things and leave immediately. Mark looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone, to defend him. But the faces that once laughed along with his jokes now stared down at the floor or watched in stunned silence. The power he had clung to so tightly slipped through his fingers in a single breath. As he shuffled toward the elevator, his steps hesitant and heavy, he turned to me one last time, his eyes pleading. "You don't have to do this," he said weakly. I tilted my head slightly and met his gaze, feeling nothing but a calm certainty wash over me. "No," I said, but I chose to. The elevator doors slid shut behind him, sealing the final chapter of a story I had spent years trying to rewrite. The moment they closed, Kayla let out a triumphant whoop, and the rest of my team burst into cheers and claps. Someone popped a bottle of sparkling water. No one had thought to bring champagne, and it sprayed across the hallway, making us laugh even harder. As the team moved in, boxes stacked high and chatter filling the space, I stood for a moment, taking it all in. The office felt bright, alive, and full of possibility. The ghosts of old doubts and insults faded beneath the sound of laughter and the energy of a team that believed in something bigger than themselves. I had once been told I would come crawling back, but standing there in that sunlit hallway, watching my team step into their new home, I knew I had never been meant to crawl. I had always been meant to rise, and in that moment, I finally felt the full height of my own power. In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened on that office floor spread like wildfire. I never intended for it to become some viral legend, but it did. Former coworkers who had once rolled their eyes at my daydreams started reaching out, offering congratulations, or asking for advice on how to leave toxic environments themselves. Some apologized for not standing up for me back then, while others simply said they wished they had believed in me sooner. I didn't hold grudges. In fact, I felt a strange gratitude for every dismissal, every slight. They had all helped me forge the armor I wore now, not heavy, defensive armor, but a light, radiant strength that shone from the inside out. Back in our new office, Bright Ember Creative blossomed beyond anything I could have imagined. We painted the once gray walls in warm, vibrant colors. We installed a giant living plant wall that filled the whole floor with life. We created cozy corners with beanbags and shelves filled with books and board games. The place felt alive, honest, and creative, a physical manifestation of the values that had lived in my heart since the first night I scribbled ideas into that old black notebook. We invited clients in, not just as business transactions, but as collaborators and fellow storytellers. Every campaign we launched carried a piece of our story, and people felt it. They responded not just with contracts, but with loyalty and love. My parents visited a few weeks after we settled in. My mom, Diane, walked in first and immediately burst into tears, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked around in awe. She touched the walls, the art, the little handwritten mission statement framed by the door. "This is you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. My dad, Tom, who never said much, walked slowly around the office, taking it all in. Finally, he turned to me and pulled me into the tightest hug of my life. When he pulled back, his eyes were misty. "I didn't get it before," he said quietly, his voice low and thick. "But I do now. I'm proud of you, kid." Those words, simple as they were, filled every empty corner that had lived inside me for years. Kayla and I became closer than ever, bonded not just by friendship, but by shared battle scars and triumphs. She officially came on as co-founder and CTO, her sharp mind and fearless spirit driving our innovation forward. We spent late nights brainstorming wild ideas over takeout, laughing until our stomachs hurt, planning future projects that felt bigger than either of us alone could have imagined. Together, we hired a team that was diverse, passionate, and relentlessly kind. We made it a point to build a culture where no one would ever feel small or silenced the way I once had. Mark, meanwhile, faded quietly from the industry. Last I heard, he moved to a different city, trying to rebuild his reputation, but his shadow no longer haunted me. I didn't feel satisfaction in his downfall. What I felt was freedom. My story had never really been about him. It was always about the parts of myself I had been too afraid to claim, the dreams I had stuffed into the back of drawers, the voice I had been taught to keep quiet. Standing at the tall windows in our new office one evening, watching the city glow beneath a soft purple sunset, I felt a deep, vibrating peace in my bones. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who used to scribble in her notebook late at night, who forced herself to swallow every insult to keep the peace, who sat on the train every morning wondering if she would ever be enough. I wanted to reach back through time and hug her, to tell her that she was always more than enough, that every whispered, maybe someday she clung to, would bloom into something real. If I could share one truth with anyone watching my story, it would be this: you don't need permission to chase what sets your soul on fire. You don't need validation from the people who benefit from keeping you small. The moment you decide to trust your own voice, to take one tiny, terrified step forward, is the moment everything changes. You become unstoppable, not because you stop being afraid, but because you learn to carry the fear with you and move anyway. As the last team member waved goodbye that evening, the lights twinkling on behind them, I stood there alone for a moment, hand resting on the glass, a soft smile on my face. I realized I hadn't just built a company, I had built a life, a living, breathing testament to every quiet hope I had once held close to my heart. And in that stillness, I finally understood. I was no longer just surviving. I was free. I was home. And I was exactly where I was always meant to be.